And this story got me thinking because Rishi Sunak is facing a fifth by-election after a report into Chris Pincher obviously has recommended a suspension of 8 weeks for Mr Pincher. He's represented Tamworth since 2010. Now, that means it's far beyond the 10-day suspension period which sparks a particular process. That allows the constituents the right to recall him as an MP. So that is way above it, as you can see. 10 days and they're recommending 8 weeks. And so he is now facing 4 by-elections after the resignations of Boris Johnson, Nigel Adams, David Warburton and Nadine Dorries as MPs. Now, obviously, in terms of what happened, Mr Pincher was found to have groped 2 men at the Carlton Club in June 2022 whilst drunk, grabbing the first by his arm before stroking his neck and squeezing his bottom. The second man, a civil servant, accused Mr Pincher of touching his bottom and squeezing his testicles. And clearly the watchdog said his conduct was completely inappropriate, profoundly damaging to the individuals concerned and represented an abuse of power. So Rishi Sunak fighting on so many fronts here, many of those by-elections coming up, I think they're going to struggle to win those. And it got me thinking about the standard, the calibre of people in political office. Now, what sort of parliament are we running if this sort of thing is allowed to happen, or at least has gone unnoticed? And I'm delighted to say that actually I'm joined now by Anne Widdecombe, member of Reform UK and also former government minister. Good morning, Anne.
Good morning to you.
Anne, you and I have spoken privately about this very matter, about the calibre of politician, and I know we spoke, I think it was last week actually, and you said to me that you felt the standard, the calibre of politician now attracted into Parliament is woeful.
Yes, it is. I mean, there are a few exceptions, there always will be. But whereas you've always had excellent MPs and you've always had stupid MPs, the range in between is what you judge by, the solid mass of Parliament. And due to positive discrimination, the decline in the status of Parliament, and the pettifogging rules that would mean no serious person would want to come in, has militated against taking in at the sort of level that we used to take for granted. So I think it is pretty woeful. I also think there are too many members of Parliament. Now, I wouldn't go as far as one has and say, well, you know, let's halve the number. I wouldn't do that, because then I think you have unwieldy constituencies. The MP just can't give the personal service that's required. But I would get it down to 500. I seriously would get it down to 500. Now, years ago, we're talking a couple of decades ago, William Hague proposed reducing the numbers to 550. And of course, immediately, there is an awful lot of self-interest involved. And the MPs don't want to do it.
No.
But that is what should be done. It should be reduced to 500, and the positive discriminations, A-lists, interference by the centre in local selections, those things should go back to where they were before, which was virtually non-existent.
So you make a really important point, actually, and I think for people who don't understand the process, where we are currently is, in the old days, the local association, this is across the board actually, would pick the candidates they think are the best candidates that would represent the people in that community, that constituency, to the best of their ability. But my understanding, and certainly what I've seen, is you've got top-down imposed targets by a central body, whether it's Labour, whether it's the Lib Dems, whether it's the Conservative Party, basically foistering particular candidates on constituencies that aren't a very good fit.
You've absolutely summed it up. I mean, in days gone by, the role of the centre was confined to approving a candidate for the list. You know, they said, yes, this person is fit to be a candidate. They did all that sort of previous vetting. Then it was entirely down to the constituencies who they took from the list, so there was no interference from the centre at all, unless it was a by-election, in which case the centre was quite likely to parachute in somebody particularly suited to fight a by-election. Other than that, the constituencies were autonomous. They decided who they interviewed, who they shortlisted, who they finally chose. And they did it with the needs of that particular constituency in mind.
And so is this, would you attribute that, the increasing centralisation, to the fact that we've lost trust in our politicians?
Oh, I think it's a factor. I don't think it's the only factor. I think it's a factor. I think the activities of the press and media, I have to say, you know, you and I are both in press and media, but they don't always give the true picture. They like a bit of melodrama. And, for example, the expenses scandal was grossly exaggerated. There were wrongdoings, which should have been punished undeniably. But the vast majority were not involved. And then, of course, when you get that sort of scandal, you get an overreaction as to how you correct it. And if you're a serious person who, say, run a major business and you know exactly what it's all about, you do not want to come in to a profession where every single bus ticket will be held up to ridicule. And that is the sort of nonsense. It's not attractive anymore. It used to have high status, was regarded as important. Yes, we were always lampooned. You want that. But we were basically regarded as serious performers, not now.
And you mentioned this idea of slimming down the numbers from 650. It was Sajid Javid who said this. Yeah. He basically also said that actually MPs should be paid more. He said that actually one of the problems is they're not paid enough. So if you are a serious player, you've run a multinational company, for example, why would you become a politician when you're paid 86,000? Now, he also goes on to say that for people who are on lower incomes, of course, going up to 86,000 is very attractive. And so he's sort of saying it's a two-pronged reason why the wrong people are going into politics. Your thoughts?
Yes, I think there's quite a bit in that. If you go back to, you know, the first half of the last century, you're going back somewhere just before the war, then indeed, when there was virtually no pay for MPs, you know, members of Parliament were divided into the wealthy, the landowners, they tended to be the Tories, the people who had money, they would go in, and on the other side, there would be huge trade union sponsorship. And so they could afford to go in. But now that that has gone and MPs are paid a supposedly professional salary, indeed you have got the impact that the sorts of people who go in now are those who can afford to supplement that salary, and those who regard it as, you know, as sort of like a lottery win because they've never been anywhere near that level of earnings. That is true, but just let me answer one of your questions. I think it's important. You said, why would somebody who's run a multinational go in you know, for 86,000 a year? The answer is yes, they used to, because they would do it at the end of their time when they had a solid record of success in the world, and they were looking to give something back. And in those days, public service through Parliament would have been a very natural first choice. Now it's probably the last choice they're going to make. And that is where the problem is. People have always been prepared. I took a cut in salary to enter Parliament. I was a perfectly ordinary university administrator. I wasn't a wealthy banker. I had to take a cut to get into Parliament. But I was happy to do so because of the nature of the job. But now there is so much hassle that comes with it, and particularly intrusion into families, for example. One of my colleagues, his son was expelled from school. That was big headlines in one national newspaper. Nobody else would get that if their child was expelled. Nobody. And so, you know, you've got to consider that sort of thing as well. There's a whole range of pressures here that were not there 20, 30 years ago.
And do you think it can be turned round? Can we get a better calibre, a higher calibre of person entering politics?
Not until the parties, A, butt out of the local selections, B, stop this nonsense of trying to select members of Parliament by identity. You know, you must have so many women on the shortlist, etc., etc. Stop doing things by identity. Go back to doing it purely on merit. Let women compete on exactly the same basis as the men, for example. And when they stop doing that, if they ever stop doing that, that is when we might gradually re-evolve the idea of a competent Parliament. At the moment, we've got a shambles there. It's a circus. This is the mother of parliaments. This is the country that, you know, gave that model to other countries. And it is a circus.